Alright, so I have said before that the Critical Drinker is annoying, he's stupid, and he's just kind of a jerk. And his fans are probably going to click on this to smash the dislike button, maybe leave an annoying comment, and then leave. Anyways, now that the worst people in the audience are gone, we can start. So last year I read one of Critical Drinker's terrible spy thrillers, a book called Redemption. I believe this is his first published novel, actually. And it wasn't good, but more people watched that video than my videos on Ben Shapiro or Steven Seagal's terrible books, so I guess I have to follow the demands of the audience, and this year I read another one of his shitty books. This one is called Dark Harvest, and it's about zombies, except not really. There's not a lot of zombies in this. It's about very little, actually.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Also, I should take a moment to say that Dark Harvest, the cover for this one is decent. It's a lot better than the one for Redemption, at least. The problem is that Dark Harvest is a title that has been used by multiple other books and movies, so the search engine optimization for this isn't very good. People have to actually know what they're looking for to find it. Beyond that, it is a very, very empty book. Like, it is empty. Generic would be a compliment, because at least generic stories are stories. This is like Redemption, except worse in basically every way, because Redemption isn't good, but things happened in here. The author did try to adapt not this story, but a different story in the same series to film a little while ago, and it was shitty. I made a video on it not that long ago. You can watch if you want. It's not good. But he also whined a lot when faced with criticism for his shitty movie, and he tried blaming others for the end result. Like, he tried blaming specifically the actress that played Anya in that, and saying that it was her fault that it was bad and not his shitty dialogue and his... Well, I guess he didn't technically direct it, but he did hire a really shitty director to direct it. Like, they had nothing to do with it. It was all her fault. Which does seem like a great way to make it in the film industry. Just attack and demean everyone who works with you and never take responsibility for your own actions. That's a great way to make it. Now, I'm not bringing that up because I dislike this guy, although I do. I'm just saying that his writing has gotten even worse than it was to start. Because it wasn't very good to begin with, but now it's worse. Because he doesn't know how to take criticism and incorporate feedback, so he'll never improve. And he's just going to get worse as he continues to crawl up his own ass. The only thing he's actually good at is repeating people's culture war grievances back at them, and that's why his work is so phenomenally empty. I really have difficulty summoning any emotions towards Dark Harvest, man. Like, yeah, it's bad, yeah, but that description is lacking. Like, I could call it bad, or I could call it boring, but that doesn't quite fit either. Because boring would be something. This has nothing. There is nothing here. It is impressive how empty this book is. Also, on the back, it claims that it's for fans of World War Z. That is a fucking lie. World War Z is not only a completely different genre than this, it's actually good. The only thing it has in common is that they both have zombies. Now, some people have criticized this guy's books by saying that they're airport novels, and I guess that's not wrong, but the thing is, I like airport novels. But, like anything else, you can do them well or you can do them poorly. Airport novels, when they're done well, are usually fast-paced thrillers and murder mysteries. They're self-contained and they're pretty easy to follow. They tend to be about grizzled badasses taking down bad guys of all stripes, Like, the Jack Reacher books are airport novels. Like, 100%. That's just what they are. They're also really good. Those books are tons of fun. They're well-constructed mysteries. We have a lot of action scenes where Reacher punches dudes to get out of trouble, but he also thinks his way out of trouble quite a lot.
How's it going?
There's also stuff like Tom Clancy novels, which are extremely well-researched and cerebral. Like, sure, there's some gunfights and action scenes in there, but not as many as you might think if you imagine Tom Clancy novels, because a lot of people haven't really read them, they just kind of know they're vaguely about spy stuff. they have less action than you might imagine. Characters almost exclusively analyze information and then try to come to conclusions based on that information and predict what their opponents are up to and what they're going to do next, and then the opponents are also trying to do the same thing at the same time. So we're reading about people trying to come up with plans to counter bad guys, and then the bad guys coming up with their counter plans. It's really, really interesting and good when it's done well. The Hunt for Red October is basically a very, very big chess game. Now, some people see spy stuff and immediately compare them to Tom Clancy, but that really is missing the forest for the trees, because there are some authors who have tried to emulate Clancy over the years by just having vague spy stuff in there, but then they completely miss the point of what makes Tom Clancy's books good. So rather than having all this intelligence and everything in there, it's just kind of gunfights. And I mean, those can be fun. It's not immediately bad, but it's not Tom Clancy. The point is, you can do airport novels well or you can do them poorly, just like anything else. And to do them well, you need a couple of things. You need characters we care about, you need a fast-moving storyline, you need heroes who at least appear intelligent. They don't necessarily have to be intelligent, but they have to at least appear that way to the audience. And there needs to be a sense of stakes so we understand why the villains must be defeated. And ideally, for this type of story, there will be some sort of big glaring mystery at the center of everything. Like who did the murder? A murder mystery, that's the whole point of the story, is figuring out who did this and why. Or what are these terrorists planning on attacking? What are they planning on doing? And how can the heroes stop them? Or can we catch the bank robbers? Will Reacher manage to bag another hottie? Things like that. A big glaring mystery at the center of the story, and we might come part of the way to solving it, but we don't actually figure out what's going on until near the end. Dark Harvest literally does none of that. It's almost impressive. The pacing is really slow and obnoxious. The characters are not at all likable or interesting. The sense of stakes is almost there. They at least attempted to do something with that, but it doesn't work. The heroes don't appear intelligent, and there's no mystery here at all. So what does it have instead? There's a couple of gunfights. That's about it. There's not even a lot of zombie action in here, which is weird considering it's supposed to be about zombies. Sometimes you can get away with having mindless action in a visual format, like on film. And only sometimes, though. I wouldn't recommend trying that for any filmmakers out there watching this, but you can sometimes get away with that. It really doesn't work in a book. It just does not, man. That's why in airport novels, the heroes usually plan and think their way out of trouble. That's why they investigate crimes instead of just going on shooting sprees where they magically find the bad guy, because that's boring to read about. Man, I really don't know if I can get 90 minutes out of this. Normally, when I do this with all the tabs and everything, I get to at least 90 minutes out of a book, but there is nothing here, man. Sure, it's bad, but the main problem is that there's just nothing here. It's more boring than Redemption, and this shit was a fucking snooze fest. This is just throwing in explosions and assuring us that the heroes are cool, but that doesn't make us care. Everything in Dark Harvest is a pale, two-dimensional facsimile of something that the author saw elsewhere and thought was cool. But he doesn't even attempt to explain or elaborate about why we should think it's cool. The only improvement this has over Redemption is that it's shorter. It's not a lot shorter, it's still over 400 pages, but Redemption was just obnoxiously long. This is, well, it still feels obnoxiously long because the pacing is terrible, but it was less of a waste of my life, I suppose. There are fewer characters in here that are all trying to hog the spotlight. We got the protagonist, Cameron Becker. He's a badass soldier dude, and that's it. There is nothing else to this man. 2/3 of the way through the book, we get a sudden backstory, but it's really, really vague, and it's shallow and brief. There's just nothing there. There's nothing to it. He popped out of the ground one day, exactly as he is at the beginning of the book, and he's exactly the same at the end of the book as he was at the beginning. He doesn't change over the course of the story. He has no personality beyond he shoots guns good. I can barely even make fun of him, And then contrast him to someone like Jack Reacher. Jack Reacher is a smart badass who's really tough, and he gets all the ladies, and yeah, he's definitely a Mary Sue, sure, but he's fun. You know, he's sassy and sarcastic, he makes some really good jokes, he comes up with smart plans on the fly, and he is also a straight up psychopath. Like, he thinks absolutely nothing about torturing or murdering someone if it serves his goals. And the Jack Reacher books acknowledge that. Like, yeah, he does some heroic stuff, certainly, but he's not a hero. He's not a good guy. But he does still have personality and dimension, and he's still generally likable and fun to follow. In some ways, he kind of reminds me of Amos Burton from The Expanse, where both of them are just kind of psychopaths, and under different circumstances, they could easily have wound up being the bad guy or working for the bad guys, but they both made conscious decisions not to give in to their urges, and so that makes them more likable and more interesting characters as a result. There's also, like I said, absolutely no mystery in this book, like at all. The prologue gives away all vital information, so the audience knows everything. The audience knows everything that's happening from the very beginning. So we just wind up watching the heroes stumble around for a few hundred pages while we already know what's happening. And maybe you could do a book like that, maybe, like theoretically you could do that, but not this one, not in this type of genre. It's remarkable, almost. Like, it's like actively trying to make me not care. Now, there is a mystery about who the leader of the bad guys is, because we don't see his face or know his real name until near the end of the book, but it's not focused on that much. Like, even the characters don't seem to care about that. There's a couple of lines where they're like, I wonder who's running this operation. And they're like, it doesn't really matter. We just got to go stop them from doing the bad guy things. And then there's a twist near the end about who the real villain was pulling the strings behind the scenes. But it's very first draft. You know, it's just kind of thrown in there to go like, look, I'll bet you didn't see that one coming. And like, yeah, it was surprising, but I honestly forgot that we were supposed to be wondering about that, so I didn't give a shit. I guess I'll get into the plot now, such as it were. There are spoilers ahead, but trust me, man, there's just nothing here. Like, some dudes shoot at each other, and then the day is saved. That is it. There's nothing here to be excited about, or to wonder about, or to go, oh, I don't want to get spoiled. Like, there's nothing here. So we start in the very distant past, and there's a woman wandering in a cave, and then she falls into a pit and dies. Riveting. That is the beginning of Prologue A. Then we get to Prologue B, because this book has two prologues, because if Blood of Hercules has shown us anything, having multiple prologues in your book is always a good thing. Anyways, Prologue B takes place in the Ural Mountains in 1959, and it basically just spends a while describing the Dyatlov Pass incident, which was a real thing. Basically, there were a bunch of people that were all hiking up in the mountains, and they all mysteriously died, and for many, many years, people have come up with theories about what happened, but most likely it was just an avalanche or some other natural disaster. Like, it is fun to theorize about what could have gone wrong there, but most likely it was something with a rational explanation. But as long as you do it well, you can take artistic license with something like that. It's fine, it's not a big deal. Now, the problem is that this prologue in total is 30 frickin' pages, and it gives us basically every piece of information about what's going on, because they're hiking. One of the members of the party is a guy named Yuri. He goes into a cave and finds a very old dead body. It's a woman dressed like a local native who is frozen over and has been there for a long time. Obviously it's the woman from Prologue Part A, but then they get Yuri out of the cave, and then he starts getting sick. Then they run into a young Mansi boy, or Mansi boy. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Mansi are the native Siberian peoples who live in that region. Now, the boy doesn't speak Russian, so they have a lot of difficulty communicating with him, but they manage to figure out that he's telling them the mountain is cursed. And then Yuri turns into a zombie, he attacks the others, and then they all die. But that takes 30 pages to describe. 30 pages of douchebags that I do not care about just arguing and whining. Like, the point of a prologue is to give the audience a small taste of mystery and hint at bigger things to come, you know? Like, they're supposed to be short and punchy and not give a lot away. This just comes right out and tells us everything. It tells us there's a zombie virus in Russia, it killed the people at the Dyatlov Pass, it originally came from a native woman who died a very, very long time ago, and her body is preserved in a frozen cave, and this all was discovered in 1959. And then the characters spend 90% of this fucking book just investigating that, and then they find, like, bits of information, but the reveals are completely meaningless to us, the audience, because we've already known that from the beginning. And it's not like it goes into more details about things and elaborates on them further in ways that make us go, oh, okay, I didn't realize that. Like, no, it just gives us all the exact same information that we already had.
I'm so bored!
At the very least, this should have been shorter so that we can get to the main story quicker. Now, maybe this could have worked if it was told from the perspective of the young Mansi boy, because he shows up, he sees the Russians acting weird, and then one turns into a zombie, and he goes, holy shit, I'm getting the fuck out of here, and he runs away. Like, that would actually be kind of interesting. Like, there'd be intrigue and there would be mystery. So, thankfully, there's only 2 prologues, so now we cut to the year 2019 in Baghdad. Our badass, fearless hero is named Cameron Becker, and he is driving. The book spends quite a while just describing all the details of the scenery and everything around him as he's driving, but he's driving, that's what he's doing. We learn that he's a U.S. Army veteran, now he's a private security contractor, and that's it. That's all there is to him. He is currently escorting a man named Luka Belikov, who is a Russian businessman. And again, that's all we get about him right now. He's just a wealthy Russian who works in business stuff. And anyways, the bad guys attack. They crash into their car, and there's shooting, and explosions, and they kidnap Belikov, and they blow up a building, and it almost kills Becker. This is cool, right? Like, you care about this shit, right?
No!
No, of course you don't. Like, this might be kind of cool and fun to watch if it was on film, but, like, it doesn't work on a book. In a book, you know? Like, books are a different medium. What works in a book will not necessarily work in a film, and vice versa. Anyways, this whole thing of Belikov getting kidnapped and there being explosions, this all takes another 30 goddamn pages. So Belikov's kidnappers call him Mr. Ivanov, and he freaks out because that's his old name. Like, he's on the run and in hiding somehow. Now, granted, he's a very wealthy businessman who's doing some unspecified business in Iraq for some reason. So I feel like he's not doing a very good job of being in hiding. Like, if he was truly trying to be in hiding and he stayed in hiding for almost 30 years, wouldn't he be more of a recluse? Just throwing that out there. But yes, this all takes like 30 goddamn pages. You know, big action scenes require the audience to care and to be invested in what's going on. So you can't just jump right in. You got to give us some time to be introduced to these people and know them and give 1/1000th of a shit what happens to them. There is one positive in this opening scene, though, and that's that Becker doesn't just lose his clients, some of his friends are also killed in the fighting. So it does make sense that he would want to go to great lengths to try and get the bad guys after this. It would be better if it was ever mentioned or focused on after the first 10% of this fucking book. Like, yeah, Becker wants revenge, he wants to catch the people who killed his friends, but he never mentions them after this opening bit. Like, they die in this opening bit, and then he goes, I'm kind of upset, let's go after these guys. And then it just never comes up again. We never go into how much his friends meant to him or anything, because I guess that might imply that our manly, stoic, badass protagonist has feelings, and that might make us give a shit about him. We can't have that.
Why are you the way that you are?
You know, people use the phrase self-insert character a lot when describing bad protagonists, but I think Cameron Becker might be one of the worst examples of that I've ever seen. There truly is nothing to him. We're just meant to think that he's cool. So after all the fighting is over, the CID, that is the Criminal Investigation Division, comes over to investigate what happened. Now, the CID is a real organization. It's part of the military police, and basically they investigate crimes involving the U.S. Army. And Jack Reacher was actually in the CID when he was in the Army, in his backstory before the books. And the investigator in this book is named Jack Turner, which is only a couple of letters off from Jack Reacher. And in Never Go Back, Reacher makes friends with another CID investigator named Major Susan Turner. Fuck off. Remember how in his main book series, the protagonist is named Ryan Drake, which is literally just a mashup of Jack Ryan and Nathan Drake? And he has multiple other characters whose names are just taken from other 80s movies that he likes? There is a fine line between referencing something you like and just fucking ripping it off. And Will Jordan just constantly rips shit off. Jack Turner is also black, which means that this is forced diversity and white genocide, and I am very, very disappointed that the Critical Drinker would turn into such an SJW cuck. SMH my head. So Turner tells Becker to just stay out of this and let the proper authorities handle it, which, like, yes, what else would he possibly say? Like, he is an actual cop with authority here, and Becker is not. He's still technically a civilian. But something, the hero must fight authority figures. So Belikov's captors take him to a lab, and then they tell him they're going to make him work on something for them. That's all we learn in that cutaway, and then we cut back to Becker again. So he opines for a bit about how he's a paramilitary contractor, which makes this the second book by this same author where he blatantly does not know what the word paramilitary means. Private military corporation, paramilitary. Those are two separate things. Words have meanings. Come on. So, whatever. A Russian diplomat named Sergei Golovko. I'm sorry, I don't speak Russian. I'm sorry if I'm saying these names wrong, but I'm trying. So Sergei Golovko comes to Becker and asks him about what happened, and Becker just relays it really quick. And Golovko tells him that he will pay $5 million if he can get Belikov safely returned to him, and another $5 million if he can capture the men who took him alive. So the Russian government really, really wants this guy. And this moment would be a really good moment where we go, oh, well, the plot thickens. Now I want to know what's going on. There must be something crazy happening. But the prologue already told us there's a zombie virus in Russia. We already know, man. And again, they keep cutting back to Belikov or Ivanov, whatever, in a laboratory and making vague allusions to making him work on something for them. So, like, we know, okay, they have the virus, or they want to recreate the virus, or something like that, and that's why the Russian government doesn't want it getting out. There is no mystery here. So Becker calls his friends, and they get to work trying to find Belikov. Now, he goes back to Turner and asks him for help, and Turner says no, but while they're talking, Becker manages to put a USB into his computer and steal some data, and then, take it back with him when he goes. And I understand the intention of this scene, but I don't think it worked very well. Like, the intention is to make Cameron Becker look really smart and like he's a quick thinker and like he's good at coming up with plans, but really it just makes Turner look like a dumbass for not noticing that. And general rule of thumb, you don't want to make your villains look stupid. You want to make your heroes look smart. You don't want to make your villains look weak. You want to make your heroes look strong. So when you write it like this, that's the opposite of what you should be doing.
Doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
Although, to his credit, Turner does immediately figure out what was going on as soon as Becker leaves. So the next chapter, there's a man named Caden Vorster. What kind of a fucking name is that? Like, Caden Vorster is supposed to be American. That sounds like the villain from an 80s movie. But a guy named Caden Vorster is hanging out somewhere far away from Baghdad, and with him is a woman named Irina Talvik. Now, these are the people who kidnapped Belikov, and it's pretty obvious from when they're introduced that they're the same people, but this is just when we first get their names. Talvik gives Vorster some good news. She tells him the virus is working and it infects all their test subjects. And now, they're trying to be coy, but again, we already know what the virus is. And it only took them a couple of days to pull this off, which is not how medical research works. That's not how scientific research works. It takes a long time and a lot of, specialized equipment and people who know what they're doing to do anything like that with viruses. So Vorster calls up his boss and tells him the good news. His boss is a mysterious man named Prophet, who Vorster has never actually met. He's only spoken with him over the phone. In fact, no one knows who Prophet is, but he somehow set everything up and created this organization which is working to develop this zombie virus into some sort of weapon. But right now, he's just the mysterious man on the phone. Who is he really? Well, like I said earlier, the characters don't seem to care that much. There's just a twist that comes in at the end about it. So, I don't really give a shit, and I'm not going to mention it that much throughout this because the book doesn't mention it that much. So Jack Turner and the CID were able to identify one of the attackers from earlier, and Becker finds out about it and he goes to interview some witnesses to the attack. And then he tells some guys that he wants revenge, and then this line comes up. "2 of my friends died in that place yesterday," he said, pointing toward the ruined warehouse. "I would like to find the men responsible." That was enough to change the mood. The concepts of revenge and retribution were strongly rooted in Iraqi culture, where disputes and grudges were more often than not settled privately, with violence. Yeah, man, that is definitely exclusive to Iraqi culture. That's not a thing that is common to most human societies throughout the world. Now, you could maybe go into detail about how it's a bit more common in Iraq than in other places due to, like, government corruption and incompetence. Like, sure, maybe that would be interesting, but then you would need to spend a paragraph or two explaining that, and that would be hard. That would be really hard, so I don't want to do it. Anyways, the witnesses overheard the bad guys mention Hanada, which is a small town in Syria. And then Becker's like, okay, I guess I gotta go investigate this town. And I just wanted to let you know that we are about 100 pages in at this point. Like, I haven't skipped over anything. Every single scene in this book is overwritten to the point of parody. Like, this book honestly might have been passable if it was shorter. You know, if it had better pacing, things just happened quickly and we moved on, it might have been passable. I don't think it would have been good, but it might have been passable. It also might have been passable if it went in depth with stuff and explained things better, like the investigation was more involved. You know, what if instead of just interviewing a couple of witnesses and immediately getting the information he needed, Becker had to investigate the blast site and look at the specific type of weapons that were used and, you know, just investigate a bit more. You know, if it was more involved, maybe that would have been better. But this book does neither. So now we cut to a new character named Laurie Dalton. Now, she's a doctor working at a refugee camp in Turkey near the border with Syria. Now, remember, this is 2019, so the Syrian civil war was still going on. I guess it's still technically going on, depending on who you ask. But it was still going on. It was just less intense than it had been a few years earlier. But Laurie is a doctor. She's working with refugees, and that is her personality. That is everything there is to know about her. She meets a deserter from the Syrian army, and he tells her about a village named Hanada where everyone died of some disease. And then the army, seeing all this disease, decided they wanted to make sure it didn't spread, so they burned all the bodies. And Dalton is like, well, shit, that could turn into a much bigger outbreak, especially because they're in a nearby refugee camp without proper sanitation or medical equipment or anything. So if a infectious disease gets set off in there, a lot of people are going to die. So Dalton asks her boss, a man named Anton Kincaid. Again, that's just a straight-up 80s movie villain name. She asks him if she can take a team to investigate. And Kincaid says no, but she decides to do it anyways. Now, take a moment to remember that Kincaid exists, because the book kind of forgets that he exists. So they go to Hanada, and they see evidence of a gunfight in the village, and they see a couple of human body parts laying around that have been chewed on. And they think, well, that's weird, because it doesn't look like these bite marks were made by animals. It looks like they were made by humans. And then tons of zombies just come out of nowhere and attack. Even though the Syrian army already came through here, and the zombies should probably have attacked them, you know, like that's what the deserter was telling Dalton earlier, that he was there with the army and they found these bodies that died of a mysterious illness. Like, the zombies should have come through and attacked them then, and then either the army should have wiped out the zombies, or the zombies should have wiped out the army, and either way, a bunch more people would probably come to investigate and figure out what was going on. I guess we should stop thinking. The important part is that the heroes get to do everything, even if it doesn't actually make sense for them to be doing it. So everyone gets killed by the zombies except for Dalton and one other guy who runs away. And then Dalton runs into a mysterious stranger who's also at the village, and it's Becker, obviously. It takes a little while for them to reveal his name, but while reading, it's very obviously Cameron Becker. So they shoot some guns, and there's some explosions, and once again, maybe this would be cool if it was on film, but on the page, it's just people I don't care about saying bad one-liners I've heard 1,000 times before. And I am not joking when I say that. Almost every line of dialogue throughout this sequence is something that I have heard a lot before. Like they barricade a door and Dalton goes, "That door's not going to hold for long." Or they're running away and he goes, "Might want to pick up the pace." Or Dalton goes, "Why should I trust you?" And he says, "I'm all you've got right now." Like, those are direct quotes. I'm not paraphrasing at all. Those are direct quotes. And I just, dude, could you try? Could you just try to write your own stuff instead of copy pasting someone else's? Could you just fucking attempt to write your own story? Could you? Maybe? Because AI writing just copies what it sees everywhere else and it does it badly. That's a machine though. Like, that's a machine that can't think or feel. This was written by a human, and it somehow manages to be just as soulless and just as copy-paste as something written by fucking ChatGPT. So Becker and Dalton escape the village, and then a jet comes by and hits it with napalm, incinerating everything. Not long after, some soldiers appear and take them prisoner. Now, these are not soldiers from the Syrian army, or one of 100 other armed groups that were running around at that time. This is the American military police, led by Jack Turner. He interrogated one of Becker's friends to find out where he went. Now, obviously it doesn't make sense that he would be allowed to pursue a criminal across international borders. Like, Syria is a country where the US Army didn't have jurisdiction, especially because Syria was in the middle of a civil war, and this could easily trigger an international incident, but rules are for pussies, I guess. Irina Talvik is also watching them as they're doing this. Apparently she killed the Syrian army patrol that was there by herself, and she didn't attract any zombies or attract any other soldiers to figure out what happened to these guys who just mysteriously went missing. Somehow she did that. So I guess we close one plot hole and open another. She doesn't have much of a backstory, but we do at least learn during this bit that she fought in the Chechen Wars, and that does make me wonder how old she's supposed to be. Because this takes place in 2019. At that point, the Chechen Wars had been over for 20 years, so if she fought in them, she would have to be her late 30s at the absolute earliest, but then she couldn't have fought in the wars that much, and she wouldn't have that much combat experience, unless she was a child soldier, or maybe she fought in the first Chechen War in the mid-90s, and she's just pushing 50 years old or something. I don't know. I don't know, but at the very least, Talvik does have a backstory reason why she has all these combat skills. Becker was just a cop. You know, army cops, MPs, they don't usually do anything exciting. They mostly just work the gate on base. Anyways, we cut back to Belikov, and it turns out he used to be a Soviet bioweapons engineer, if you couldn't figure that out yourself already. That's what he did. So while Becker is being held as Jack Turner's prisoner, and they're all driving back to Baghdad, they find a broken down truck in the middle of the road, and they all stop and are annoyed. They're not suspicious at all that their path has been blocked, even though they're in the middle of a fucking war zone. And Becker, being the smart boy that he is, realizes that this is an ambush, but he doesn't realize it soon enough to warn anyone or be useful.
Okay, but that's worse. I mean, you do get how that's worse, right?
And so then there's some shooting and some explosions. It's the bad guys, and they're being led by Caden Vorster, and he tells them to capture Becker alive, because he has some sort of connection with him. Also, this is when we find out that Jack Turner brought his soldiers to Syria illegally without telling anyone. And someone would notice that. Again, we are closing one plot hole by opening up another. That's not how you're supposed to do it. So there is some more shooting and some more blowing of things up, and then Vorster and Becker see each other. "Vorster?" he whispered, barely able to get the word out. Vorster smiled, pleased by the shock written across his face. "The ghost of Christmas past, you might say." "You're dead," he stammered, still groping to understand how this man could be standing before him now. "I saw it happen." "Yeah, you did," Vorster acknowledged, gray eyes flaring with malice. "But I was given a second chance. You might say I've been reborn."
Shut up, bitch!
Okay, look, this dialogue is weird, because you have one guy who, his dialogue's very wooden, but at least it's trying to sound normal, and then you have another guy who talks like fucking Sephiroth. And it does not mesh at all. So some more American soldiers appear, because apparently Dalton's friend who ran off at the village, he actually survived the attack and he brought back help. So they come and they start shooting at the bad guys, and then Vorster and Talvik flee. There's one bad guy who is wounded and gets left behind, so Becker tortures him, gets no useful information out of him, and then summarily executes him.
So he's an idiot.
Because he's like a badass or something. And you know what? I'm fine with this moment. Why would we want the hero to have any sort of moral code to separate him from the terrorists? Who cares if that guy might have had useful information? Who cares that giving him due process would thematically separate the heroes from the villains whose entire plan consists of indiscriminate death? Let's just smash some fucking action figures together. That sounds way better. Also, Becker and that terrorist that they just caught were both technically in the custody of the MPs, meaning that he just murdered another detainee in front of multiple witnesses. Like, his ass would get locked up forever in this situation. But you probably don't need me to tell you that nothing comes of this.
Hi guys, Editor James here. I wanted to take a moment to just elaborate a little bit more on this moment because this is probably the scene that gives Becker more character development than anything else in the book, completely by accident, and it is very much glossed over. So, like, for starters, Becker just straight up murders this guy. Like, sure, he's a terrorist, and you don't have to feel super sorry for him, I don't think, but legally speaking, that is what he did. This guy was a prisoner who posed no more threat to him. And none of the other characters even seem bothered by it. Like, there's not even a line of dialogue where they're like, Becker, that wasn't okay, but we really need your help on this, so we're gonna turn a blind eye to that. Or anything along those lines, which, sure, that would be a bit of an ass pull, but at least there would be some explanation for it. Like, there would be acknowledgement that what he just did is not okay, at least legally speaking, even if you agree with it morally speaking. I don't think that the author is against the idea of due process. I don't think he's against the idea of people having to do a proper investigation and then giving someone a fair trial to, prove if they're guilty or innocent. It would be strange if he was against that, but at the same time, I can't see anything else that he might be trying to say here. I think he's just stupid, to be honest with you. I think he's just really stupid, and in his head he's going, yeah, badasses execute people summarily all the time, right? Like, that's what they do. I keep bringing up Jack Reacher, so I may as well do it again. He does sometimes do things like this, but number one, the books don't make any excuses for it. Like, they don't dive into it a whole lot, obviously, but they don't make excuses for his actions all the time. Like, other characters will point out that, oh yeah, that was just a homicide you just did, but he also tends to leave at the end of the story. He tends to leave town at the end of a story, and then the consequences just never catch up with him. Like, it doesn't make total sense if you think about it, but at least the books themselves are acknowledging that he's kind of a psychopath. This book doesn't do that, and so it comes across more as wish fulfillment, but we also just need to take a moment and point out that it's really stupid. Like, Becker spends about a minute trying to interrogate this guy, and when he doesn't give him useful information, he just kills him, and Becker is a cop. He should know that a lot of interrogations take a very long time. Like, sometimes they take hours or days or even weeks in some cases, but you can't get useful information immediately all the time. Like, there's a process to this, and he should know that. And of course he knows that because later on in the book, we'll get to that, he does interrogate someone else, and it takes a while to get useful information out of him. So I'm not sure why he would immediately jump to killing the one possible source of information that they have at this point in time. And honestly, if you wanted to avoid this part, which makes Becker not only look stupid, but look like an absolute monster, you could literally just have the guy die of his wounds. Like, he was already wounded, and in all likelihood he wouldn't make it. Or they could just have him be arrested and forget about him the rest of the book. Like, he got arrested, and then he went into medical care, and that's it. I honestly wouldn't question it if they did that to him. Or if they wanted to give this captured terrorist any personality at all, any character at all, then they could show him being a true believer in the cause up until the end, and he could, like, bite down on a cyanide capsule or something, or maybe he could reach for a gun and try to kill someone, and then Becker has to kill him in self-defense. Like, there are a million ways that you could avoid not only making Becker look like an idiot, but you could avoid the, let's say, morally complex, to put it nicely, parts of this scene, and they just didn't do any of those. They just went with, yeah, let's try and make this guy look badass, but they just wind up making him look insane. I don't know. I was looking over this footage and I wanted to elaborate more. Let's go back to the video now.
So Vorster and Talvik are at the lab from earlier. People are scrambling to dismantle everything and destroy evidence because, again, the virus has already been modified in the exact way that they wanted it to be in only a couple of days, and then they infect Belikov and turn him into a zombie. Now, the heroes manage to trace a cell phone call to a lab, which is in Turkey, and then they go to investigate. Like, again, they just already found the bad guy's lab. It took no effort and very little time. They can just do that. Why would we want to watch people investigate a mystery? That sounds boring. They reach the lab, and it's abandoned by the time they get there, but evidence of them working on the virus is all over the place. And they find Belikov. He's, like, restrained, but he's a zombie now, and they kill him and put him out of his misery. And Becker calls up Golovko, the Russian diplomat from earlier, and tells him about this. Meanwhile, Dalton does an autopsy on the zombie corpse, and there's not a whole lot of information there. Like, basically, they're still technically alive. They just go crazy. There's nothing new, noteworthy there. Like, zombies have been done a million times. You could change something about their anatomy or their behavior that might make them stand out. That's why we have some zombie stuff that has fast zombies and some stuff has slow zombies. Sometimes they are dead and you have to get them in the brain to kill them. Other times, they're still technically alive, but it's very difficult to take them down. Or ones that are caused by a virus versus ones that are caused by a supernatural force of some sort. Like that. Having these differences in there and exploring the nuances of these differences can make zombies be different from the 1,000 other types of zombies we've seen. But I guess let's not do that. It just says, yeah, have you seen 28 Days Later? It's like that, except the zombies are less infectious and therefore less dangerous and therefore less scary. So Dalton calls her boss, Kincaid, remember, and tells him what's going on, and then the building's power goes out, which causes all the internal doors, which were electronically locked, to open. And then tons of zombies pour out, and there's some shooting and bullets and stuff, and then they escape and blow up the entire building. And I will say that while this sequence isn't great, it is probably the best part of the book. Like, it's certainly the closest thing I felt to excitement in the whole book, because the concept is kind of cool. There's a horde of zombies in a dark, confined space, and the heroes are trying to escape. That's a cool idea. It's just not done very well. So now we cut to a flashback. It's at the collapse of the USSR. Some pilots are taking a sample of the virus on a plane, and then the plane crashes and it's lost. And then in the next chapter, we are immediately told all of this by Golovko. So we could have just cut that out entirely and had, like, one line of dialogue explaining everything. Golovko tells Becker that, yeah, they found a weird virus at Dyatlov, they did some experiments on it, and they realized they couldn't really use it the way they wanted to, so they just put it in storage, and then later it was lost. Like, again, we're just repeating information that we've already gotten. Like, cut some of this stuff out, the pacing would be quicker, and there would be an actual mystery in the story for the audience to wonder about. Like, this is the sort of shit that you write in a first draft, and then you go back and fix later. Now, this whole conversation with Golovko just telling them everything, it goes on for a little while, and the only actual reveal is that he is apparently the one who ordered the airstrike on Hanada, which nearly killed Becker and Dalton. And you know what? That actually makes sense. Like, yeah, the Russian government would be able to do that. They would have planes and shit that could drop napalm on a village and destroy the virus and destroy evidence of it. Like, okay, that actually makes sense. Good job. You get 1 point, book. They know at this point that Vorster has the virus, and they know that Vorster wants Becker, so they're going to try and use him to lure the bad guys out. Why does Vorster want Becker? Well, this is where we learn his backstory, such as it is. See, Becker was an army policeman. He was in the CID, just like Jack Turner. I'm so sorry. I don't know how I could possibly get these characters mixed up. But he was in the CID, and Vorster was in some Black Ops unit, which is never actually named, I don't think. And Vorster apparently killed civilians and stuff, and it got covered up. Maybe it was done on the orders of higher-ups. We don't actually know. Vorster claims he was doing it to stop terrorists, and in order to prevent himself and his friends from being investigated, he allegedly killed one of Becker's friends. And then Becker thought he killed Vorster in revenge, but he somehow survived. And it's never proven that Becker killed him, but people were kind of suspicious, so that's why he left the army. And I know that the way I said that was pretty vague, but the book is really vague about it too. We don't get any specific details or anything about any of this. Maybe this could have been interesting if there was anything there, like anything at all, but this is all so lacking in detail that I can't bring myself to feel anything towards it. Like, am I supposed to agree with Becker's actions? I think I'm supposed to agree with him, because this book and this author are, quite frankly, not intelligent enough to write a protagonist that we're supposed to disagree with sometimes, but there's also not enough there for me to think that he was right. What evidence did he have of Vorster's misdeeds? Like, all we have are vague suspicions. And we've already seen Becker summarily execute a prisoner who had surrendered, so his judgment is a little suspect, let's say, but the book pretends that because he's the main character, he's uncontestable, and there's no specifics given about what Vorster did at any point, so this all comes across as nothing. You know, Becker doesn't come across as a badass good guy, he doesn't come across as a conflicted anti-hero, he doesn't come across as a bad guy, he doesn't come across as anything. He just did stuff, and I'm supposed to clap because he's the main character. And it is very strange to me how a book that is this overwritten in every single scene would completely neglect important character details like this. Anyways, they make it look like Becker is in a car and they control it remotely, so they drive it out somewhere and then Vorster attacks it. But him and his men are counter-ambushed by an FSB team, FSB being Federal Security Bureau, they're Russians. And that is actually the first intelligent tactic in this book. 260 pages in. Vorster gets shot, but he's not too badly wounded, so he gets captured, and Talvik also gets shot, but as she dies, she sends a message to their agents who are scattered all around the world and tells them to release the virus. Cut to a man who is flying into Heathrow Airport in London. He's German, and he's carrying the virus, he's one of their agents. His name is Klaus Müller, which every character's name in this book is like the first thing you imagine when naming someone from that country. It's like J.K. Rowling, but much less creative. So Becker and the other heroes torture Vorster by threatening to infect him with the virus, and he thinks the world is going to end very soon, but he still breaks very, very quickly and gives them all the information they want. He tells them there are 4 agents that are on planes all around the world, and they manage to stop 2 of them very easily, but they don't stop Klaus Müller in time, and he releases his sample of the virus in Heathrow. They also release the virus in Washington, D.C., but we don't get a whole lot of information about that in the book. So the authorities quarantine the areas, and they don't tell people what happened. And it's pretty clear, though, that by this point the virus has already begun spreading, and they only have a few days before things start to get really, really bad, and a few weeks before civilization itself just begins to fall apart. Now, at this point, we're about 300 pages in, 3/4 of the way through the book. Is this the time to have a big, exciting climax? No. Weirdly enough, this book does the exact opposite.
That's stupid! Use your common sense!
Yeah, everything gets really, really dull and boring at this point, and even the gunfights and explosions cease. Like, there's just nothing going on in this last quarter of the book. Like, Golovko goes back to Russia, and he says that maybe they can declare martial law as a last resort and prevent the virus from spreading, but he doesn't seem to have high hopes that it'll actually work. He's basically telling everyone, yeah, make peace with God because we are fucked. Now it's time for Dalton's backstory, such as it is. Basically, she was in Nigeria, and she found a young man who had been shot, and everyone told her, hey, don't help him, he's a terrorist, but she helped him anyways, and then a little while later, he came back and was a suicide bomber and killed himself and a bunch of other people. And Dalton feels really bad and guilty about that. And she attempted to commit suicide by cutting her wrists because women, am I right, man? Am I right, fellas? Women, that's what they be like, I guess. But then Anton Kincaid saved her life. That's the extent of her backstory. Much like Talvik and Becker's backstories, this is completely perfunctory. Like, it's only there to give the impression that there's something there. You know, it doesn't impact Dalton's current actions or her beliefs in any way. It's just a desperate attempt to go, no, this character is a character. She has, okay, she doesn't have a personality, but like some things happened in her past, and that's the same as having a personality, right? No, it's not. Now, the book also keeps cutting back and forth to Heathrow while it's under quarantine. Like, it's just showing some random characters that we don't know and don't care about, and I don't even think we get any sort of resolution to what happens with them at the end of the book. So I really don't care if they're in danger. Like, they aren't running from zombies or anything. They're just standing around, they're scared, and they're unsure of what's happening. Like, the closest thing to an exciting moment with this is when one guy breaks out of the quarantine and tries running away, and soldiers shoot him. Like, they just shoot him dead right outside the airport, and everyone's like, oh my gosh! And again, under different circumstances, that scene could have worked, but like, I don't know these people and I don't care about them. So Becker sneaks away, he tells reporters about the virus on live TV, and he asks anyone with information to come forward, which is not the best idea, to be honest, but hey, it works because a man named Okishev contacts them. Now, he's the young Mansi boy from the prologue of the book. Remember that native Siberian who ran into the Dyatlov Pass party? Like, yeah, he is still here. He's still alive. He's just a very old man now. And he tells them about everything he saw, and he mentions the cursed mountain and the cave, which might have meant something if we didn't already know all of this. And apparently the Soviets, when they found out about this mysterious virus, they just showed up, they got samples of it, and then they didn't search the area further, and they didn't ask anyone any questions about it. So they never went to the cave with the dead woman where the virus originated. Like, they just never found it and never questioned it, never decided to look into it further and see if maybe this thing has already spread. They just didn't do that. Okay, but the characters realize that they can go to the source of the virus at the cave, and they can maybe take a sample of it and use it to create a cure. So they fly to Russia, they nearly get shot down before Golovko intervenes, they hike to the mountain, and they go to the cave, and they find the dead woman. And Kincaid is with them the whole time, and it turns out he's a bad guy. Yeah, he was Prophet all along, and he gives a bad guy monologue about how he wants to cull the population to stop climate change and resource overconsumption and stuff. How did this guy manage to hide his identity? How did he manage to create a whole terrorist network? How did he manage to fund everything? Don't worry about it. So Becker and Okishev fight Kincaid, and then they win and he dies. The whole climax revolves around one burning question. Can this badass super soldier who we've been watching cut down terrorists without any trouble the entire book defeat a scientist in his 50s? Yes, he can defeat him. It's not very exciting. They get the virus sample, and they almost instantly make the cure, and then it cuts to a month later, and the day is saved. They try to do a fake-out Becker death, but it's very, very transparent. And that's it. Yeah, man, you might think I'm skipping over stuff during this summary, but I'm not. There is nothing in this. There is nothing here. There's just dudes shooting each other. There's no mysteries, there's no complex or interesting characters, there's no deeper themes, and everything is all completely surface level. Like, all emotions and thoughts are just kind of acted out on the surface, acted out in the open. There's no subtlety or subtext or nuance of any sort. You know, man, bad would be something. If this book was bad, that would be something. Boring would be something. This barely exists. It feels like an outline that somehow got published, and it's honestly weird that it is worse than his other book, because this one's already shit. But that's the thing. Shit is something. Ryan Drake is a shitty character, but there's a couple of things to him. You know, he has a sister that he loves, he has a drinking problem, which is never ever explored or brought up properly in the book, but it's there, and he does care about Anya. Like, none of this is explored well, none of it is handled well, but it's there. There's another character in Redemption named Dietrich, who is a heroin addict, and we find out about his heroin addiction, and then he stops his heroin addiction over the course of a single page, which is stupid, but it's there. And there is nothing at all like that in Dark Harvest. There's just nothing. It took me from July until September to finish this fucking book, and that never, ever fucking happens to me. And then it took me another month to get my notes together for all this, and then it took me like another week and a half before I actually filmed this fucking thing. I just cannot summon the energy to give a single fuck about any of this. Like, not even to hate it. Like, at least Blood of Hercules was stupid in an interesting way. Go watch that video if you haven't, by the way. True Allegiance was stupid, but at least Ben Shapiro was trying to tell an actual story there. And in Dark Harvest, there are some stupid decisions that characters make that don't make that much sense, and there's some stupid science in there, but I think that comes with the territory when you're writing about fucking zombies. But those feel like they stem from laziness rather than a genuine attempt which just fails. Because this is a zombie story with barely any zombie stuff in it. You know, zombie stories, when you get down to it, are about the breakdown of society when the hordes come. Maybe it's just the breakdown of society in one area, maybe it's the entire world, but that's what it is. It's about the breakdown of society, and it's about a fight against something that's more a force of nature than it is a conscious person or group. So when the zombie virus just becomes a MacGuffin that the characters are fighting over, you lose a lot of what makes it entertaining and interesting. You know, there's another book called Patient Zero by Jonathan Maberry, which has the exact same premise. You know, a super spy stops terrorists from releasing a zombie virus. Now, I tried reading this book when I was like 15. I didn't get into it, so I only read like 50 or 60 pages. I have read Rot and Ruin, though, which is also written by the same author. That one's pretty good, and it's also about zombies. And maybe it's bold of me to say that Will Jordan just ripped off Patient Zero for this book, but I think he did. Because he's ripped off people a lot before. Like in Redemption, the backstory of Anya and the villain is taken directly from Metal Gear Solid 3. There's an interrogation scene in here which is ripped wholesale from an episode of 24, which I believe I mentioned in my video on this. The cover is a ripoff of the poster for North by Northwest. The main character is named Ryan Drake, which, as I mentioned earlier, is just a mashup of Jack Ryan and Nathan Drake. And then in Dark Harvest, like I said, we have Jack Turner, which is just a mashup of Jack Reacher and Susan Turner. And Becker is kind of a ripoff of Jack Reacher as well, because he's also a former CID army cop with inexplicable combat skills, but he lacks the intelligence, charm, and wit that makes Reacher likable. The few bits of dialogue I gave you earlier should probably give you an idea. Those are all ripped off from somewhere else. Like, it's literally just cliches we've heard hundreds of times that could be said by anyone. There's no character in the dialogue at all. So I think the author has no qualms about stealing from other people without changing anything. So I'm pretty sure he did just straight up rip off the premise of Patient Zero. I don't think he actually read Patient Zero, though. He doesn't seem to read at all, actually. Like, everything he steals from is either movies or video games. And you might be thinking like, oh, well, weren't you saying he stole from Jack Reacher? Yes, but the only stuff he's stolen from with Jack Reacher is the Jack Reacher books that have been adapted to screen in some way. So I think he's literally just watching movies and playing video games and stealing from those rather than reading actual books. Like, I don't think he took time to consider that those are different mediums that work in different ways. It's like he's trying to recreate visual noise in written form. Like I said earlier, his attempt at a movie is also shitty, and he blames everyone but himself for that. Like, he just doesn't understand the basics of storytelling. He has no creativity and no desire to improve his craft. All he does is whine about women and minorities in video games or movies. You know, one weird thing about Dark Harvest is that the climax is oddly small and oddly rushed. It's literally just a couple of dudes in a cave. They have a monologue and a very brief fight, and then it's over. Like, you would think it would be something big, like, you know, the big zombie attack at the village or at the lab. You know, I was kind of thinking that the key to saving the day would be at Heathrow Airport, because they keep cutting back to that, and it's weird that it never leads anywhere, but they kept cutting back to it. So I was thinking to myself, like, okay, maybe Klaus Muller has a cure or a vaccine with him, and when he released the virus, he actually survived. and then they have to like infiltrate the airport full of thousands of zombies and retrieve the cure so that they can make more. You know, imagine if Becker had to fight through a horde in order to reach the new MacGuffin and save the day. Like, that might have been fun, but there's no zombies in the climax at all, so what's even the fucking point? This might sound strange, but this bad and rushed climax does kind of remind me of shitty young adult novels. Like, I have plenty of videos about that sort of thing on this channel, but you know how there's oftentimes a lot of focus on pointless romantic hijinks, and then suddenly they realize they need to wrap up the plot, so they have a very small climax with 2 to 5 characters, and then it ends quickly, but they act like it's some huge world-saving battle. You know, examples of this would be like in Fallen, when God just comes along and saves the day from Lucifer, or in Fourth Wing, when suddenly there's a fucking rebellion that we've never heard about until now, or in Hush Hush, in the last book, there's suddenly 2 armies from hell and a battle in a graveyard, and someone betrays the hero because he's just evil for the sake of it. Or Elixir, when... You know what, I'm not even getting into Elixir, man. Whatever that insanity was, all you need to know is that Hilary Duff tried writing a book. The point is that in pretty much all of these, the climax is really short and crappy, and it's over in like 20 pages. And Dark Harvest has the same issue. And it's a weird similarity to have. I don't know, man. Like, I wish there was more to go over, but there's just nothing here. You know, the only thing I can think of that might have improved this would be a theme. And that theme is staring us right in the face. Like, is it okay to kill innocents for the good of many? You know, Anton Kincaid, or Prophet, wants to kill a bunch of people to try and preserve civilization. Like, he thinks things cannot possibly continue on this path, and so he's going to kill a lot of innocent people for the good of the whole. Vorster did a lot of shady Black Ops stuff that maybe killed civilians. We don't actually get any confirmation that he did that. We just have vague suspicions from Becker. But, you know, let's say Vorster did do some shady Black Ops stuff and kill civilians, and if he had been doing that for a purpose, maybe that could have been interesting. And Vorster himself does claim that he was doing everything for good reasons, but it never goes anywhere. You know, Vorster isn't the villain because he does bad things. Vorster does bad things because he's the villain. All we get in terms of justification from him is that he makes some vague allusions to stopping suicide bombers before they get the chance to harm soldiers. But that's all we get. We get vague allusions to stuff that might be interesting. Like, this is why we give details when we tell stories. What sort of Black Ops stuff did he do? Who did he kill? How did he kill them? Why did he kill them? It doesn't matter. He's designated as the bad guy, so we just have to assume that everything he's ever done is evil, because why bother in throwing uncertainty, or shades of gray, or nuance, or anything like that, because that might be interesting. Becker really hates rules and regulations, I think, because he breaks them a lot in this book for what he sees as the greater good, e.g. protecting innocent life, or getting revenge for his friends, and you could easily tie that into this bigger theme. You know, you would have to cut out to the part where he summarily executes a prisoner, but that wouldn't be too difficult. Like, maybe Becker could acknowledge that Prophet has a point, but he was just unwilling to let regular people die. You know, he'd rather let the world burn than let innocents suffer, and that would kind of tie in with his backstory with Vorster. That would fit with Dalton, too, because she's a doctor, and that could maybe be an interesting idea to explore, and an interesting way to show that the heroes and the villains are both doing what they think is the right thing to do, but they're both kind of going about it in shitty ways, and okay, yeah, maybe there's some shades of gray to this, and there's no perfect answers. Like, that could be interesting to explore. And if they failed to do that, they could at least do literally anything with the fact that there are zombies here. Like, maybe they fail to contain the virus in the first half, which does kind of happen, and then the second half is them trying to stop the horde. You know, like, no matter what they do, millions of people will die. Can Becker stop it from being billions? Like, you know, that might be fun, and it would be perfect for an airport novel. It would be exciting. It would be self-contained. I get the feeling that this man's books are what people imagine when they think of airport novels or when they think of thrillers. But trust me, most of them are better than this. Most of them are far better than this. Like, even the crappier ones are a step above Redemption and multiple steps above Dark Harvest. For a different example of something kind of similar, let's look at Hallmark movies. Now, those movies are not aimed at me. I don't like them, I don't think they're good, but I've seen some, and they could be so much worse because they at least have plots and they understand the basics of the genre that they're set in. Now, people who don't like thrillers or airport novels could pick up a decently made thriller or airport novel or murder mystery or anything of that sort, and they would probably feel similarly to how I feel about Hallmark movies. They'd go, yeah, it's not my cup of tea, but at least it was well put together and I understand the appeal. Thrillers are a genre that I like, and they're a genre that I fit the target demographic for, but this feels like it was written by someone who has active contempt for that genre. I feel like Will Jordan watched movies with similar plots and then tried to do them as books. Like I said, I don't think he reads books very often. I don't think he's ever read thriller novels in this style. And I've made fun of bad romantasy books for being written by people who obviously, don't read outside that genre. I've straight up called it literary inbreeding not that long ago because it leads to the same shit being used over and over and over again, but it's being used without justification or without passion, and so it just winds up not making much sense, but people go, oh, but it has enemies to lovers, that means it's good. But, I've made fun of that. But at least romantasy authors fucking read. They know what they're trying to emulate, they're just doing a bad job of it. Will Jordan is just copying shit he saw on TV poorly. Now, would Dark Harvest be better if he tried to copy stuff that he read in other thriller books? Probably. It probably would be better, because at least then he would understand the basics of how to write this kind of story. And I don't have a big point to end on, so just here's some other stuff in this book that was weird, bad, or simply dumb. The Russian government refined and modified this virus and held on to it for over 30 years, but somehow they don't have any data on it that the heroes can access and use to, work on a cure or anything. Also, they are never really criticized for working on this biological weapon, and no one questions what they're gonna do with the virus once they have it. Like, no one tries to destroy the samples of it. Like, no one tries to destroy that woman's dead body or bring it to more trustworthy people. It's just sort of out there at the end. During the whole zombie attack at the lab, the heroes blow up a building in Turkey, and the Turkish government never comes up. Like, they never question anything or investigate anything or try to arrest anyone. There's not even a line of dialogue about how Golovko just says, yeah, my government talked to their government, they're turning a blind eye to this, they're just going to say it was a gas line explosion, or something like that. There's just nothing. There were a ton of zombies in the lab in Turkey. Where did all those test subjects come from? Were they all locals? Were they brought in from other places? How long have they been there? And if they were already doing research, why did they need Belikov so badly? Like, if he could do whatever he was trying to do in only a couple of days, why did they need him at all? Someone else could have figured it out. It might have taken them longer, but someone else could have figured it out, and it would have drawn less attention to them, because then they wouldn't have been having gunfights in the middle of Baghdad and kidnapping wealthy Russian businessmen. The story largely takes place in the Middle East, but none of the characters are from there. They're pretty much all Americans and Russians, and they don't have like any local guides or local interpreters. No local soldiers or police are brought in to help. Like, there's just nothing, which is a little strange. Kincaid, or Prophet, wanted to kill a huge chunk of the world's population. Did his employees know that? Like, did the terrorists that were working for him, did they know that? Did they know what they were working on? And if they did know what they were working on, how the hell did he convince them to do that? If they didn't know what they were working on, how did he hide it from them? There are 100 small moments like that. Look at how many tabs I have in here. There's a lot of moments that just straight up are dumb or don't make sense. And I didn't read that many passages while going through this, partially because the dialogue and everything is exactly the same as everything else you've heard or read or seen a million times. I just cannot summon the energy to care. I just cannot. I have already put in far more thought and far more effort than the author did here. I respect bad books that are trying. This is not trying. This was kind of trying. Like, it was still ripping off a lot of other shit, but at least it was kind of trying to tell a story. It wasn't his story, but he was trying to tell a story. This one is not trying. Not a single page of this Drek was written out of passion for books or for passion for anything, really. Not a single paragraph was dedicated to making me care. It was just smashing action figures together and demanding I clap. Go back to whining about children's movies, Will. You're a hell of a lot better at that. Goodbye. Hello, thanks to everyone who watched all the way to the end of the video. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. Do you see all these names here? These are my patrons. These are the guys that send me money over on Patreon. If you want to get your name here, you can give me $5 or more a month. I really appreciate it. You can also become a YouTube channel member. That gives you the same benefits, like having early access to videos and stuff. You just don't get your name on here. Huge thanks to my $10 and up patrons, 3-Day Cat, Arthur D. Gonzalez Martin, Brother Santodes, Carolina Clay, Lexi DeLorme, Lord Tiebreaker, Michael and Katie Hake, Mr. A5013, Proscriptions of Zhuojang, Psych XS, Slumbering Jellyfish, Observing Outer Space, Tesla Shark, Toa Michael, Vevictus, and Wesley. I wouldn't be able to do this without all of these people here, as well as all the rest of you. If you can't support me that way, then again, liking the video, commenting on it, sharing it around, subscribing to my channel if you haven't, or just having a lovely day. I guess that helps too. See you around. Goodbye.